The U.S. Titan floated silently in the darkness, its hulking form barely visible against the vastness of space. Its immense size dwarfed everything around it. Once, it had been the pride of humanity's naval forces, an unsinkable, unstoppable warship designed to protect Earth from any threat. But that had been centuries ago, before the Great War had torn the human race apart. Now it was all that remained of a once thriving species. The Titan's massive engines were long silent, its communication systems dormant, its weapons systems inert. It was a ghost ship, a monument to humanity's greatest achievements, and perhaps its greatest failures. The galaxy had long since moved on. The story of Earth and its people faded into myth, and the Titan had been left to drift alone in the forgotten reaches of space. Inside the ship, Captain Area Carter stared out from the bridge's viewport. A cold silence of space stretched on endlessly, interrupted only by the occasional creak of the ship's frame. The Titan was in a dead system, far from any known colony or trade route. It was the perfect place to hide, to remain unnoticed. But hiding had its toll. Area was alone in the vast expanse of the ship. She had become the last of her kind, a captain without a crew, the last remaining survivor of Earth's military leadership. Her mission was simple: maintain the ship, preserve humanity's legacy, and wait for a sign that the galaxy was ready for humanity to rise again. But she'd been waiting for a long time, and the silence was becoming unbearable. The crew she had once commanded had long since been lost, either to the war or the passing years. Earth had fallen to the Directions, an alien empire whose hunger for conquest and destruction had wiped out humanity. The survivors had scattered, and in the end, they had been unable to rebuild. It was as though the universe had decided that humanity's time had passed. But Area wouldn't give up. Not as long as the Titan was still operational. Not as long as she still had breath in her lungs. She knew the ship's systems inside and out. It was old, damaged, but still powerful. The weapons were dormant, but not broken. The engines could still roar to life if needed. The Titan had been designed for war, and war was something humanity had never truly left behind. Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft peep, a signal, a distress call. For a moment, she thought it was just a malfunction, but as she checked the coordinates, her heart skipped a beat. The signal was coming from a nearby planet, one that was inhabited. Her fingers danced over the controls, and she opened a communications channel, but all she received was static, a garbled voice too faint to make out. She enhanced the signal, trying to clear up the noise. A series of broken words came through. Please, help. Directions. Attack. The message hit her like a punch to the gut. The Directions. They were still out there, still hunting. But this time, they weren't attacking Earth. They were attacking someone else. Captain Carter's heart raced. The Titan had been in hiding for so long, and now there was a chance, a small, fleeting chance, that humanity could fight back. But how? She was alone, with a ship that hadn't seen a real battle in over 100 years. But the ship was still a weapon, and humanity had never been one to back down from a fight. With a steely resolve, Area made a decision. She wasn't just going to wait any longer. The Titan was no longer a relic. It was a weapon, and it would be wielded once more. Let's see what the Titan can do, she whispered to herself as she set course for the planet, unaware that her decision would ignite a chain of events that would shake the galaxy to its core. The Titan's engines roared to life, their long dormant hum shaking the ship's skeletal frame. The ship, once the pride of humanity, now felt like a forgotten relic of a time lost. Captain Area Carter gripped the armrests of her chair as the immense vessel began its slow crawl toward the planet's atmosphere. It had been centuries since the Titan had been in motion, and though the ship was built to endure, she could feel its age with every creak and groan of its old systems. The distress signal still echoed in the background, a haunting reminder of the danger lurking beyond the Titan's viewports. The Directions were close, And whatever hope the humans might have had of surviving this encounter rested on Aria's next decision. The message had been clear, though it had faded into static. Directions. Attack. Help. Please. But she couldn't afford to dwell on it. The survival of humanity was at stake, and she would not fail. Aria turned away from the control panel and stood, her boots clanging against the metal floor. The room was quiet, too quiet, save for the soft hum of the ship's systems. The Titan was not only a battleship, it was a symbol, the last vessel of a civilization that had reached its zenith only to fall tragically short of greatness. But it was still alive, still capable of incredible feats, and with it, Aria held the key to humanity's future. She moved quickly, crossing the bridge to the nearby cryo chamber. The long rows of stasis pods, each one holding the last survivors of Earth, stood in cold, silent slumber. Aria paused in front of the first pod, her breath catching in her throat. These were the men and women who had been humanity's greatest minds, soldiers, scientists, engineers, the best of the best. Their faces were peaceful in their suspended animation, unaware of the passing years, unaware that their world had crumbled to dust. Aria's fingers hovered over the controls. There was no going back now. She was about to wake them up, and there was no telling how they would react. Would they be ready to fight for their species again? Or would they be lost, too broken by time to reclaim what was theirs? With a deep breath, she activated the cryo chamber. A soft whirring filled the air as the pods began to warm, the liquid inside them draining away, and the soft hiss of oxygen filled the chamber. One by one, the survivors began to stir, their eyes fluttering open, blinking against the harsh reality of their new world. "Captain," came a groggy voice from one of the pods. Lieutenant Gabriel Kane, a former tactical officer, blinked up at her, his expression one of confusion mixed with fear. Where are we? What happened to Earth?" Aria swallowed hard. She had no easy answer for him. She could tell him the truth, that Earth was lost, that humanity had been scattered across the stars, forgotten. She could tell him that the world they had known was gone, replaced by the desolate galaxy they now inhabited. But she didn't. "We're aboard the U.S. Titan. Earth fell to the directions," she said, her voice steady. "And now, it's time to fight back." Kane nodded slowly, still groggy, but clearly processing the gravity of the situation. His eyes moved across the room, meeting the gazes of the other crew members now beginning to wake from their pods. One by one, they emerged from stasis, their memories clouded and fractured, but their instincts sharp. Is it really true?" asked Dr. Maya Chen, a brilliant scientist and one of the few remaining geneticists. "We're the last of our kind." Aria's heart ached, but she nodded. "Yes, the Titan is all that's left of humanity." A silence fell over the room. It wasn't the weight of despair, though. It was the weight of realization. These were the last humans, and it was their responsibility to rise from the ashes of their species. Humanity had always been at its best when pushed to the brink of extinction. And now, they would fight for the right to exist. "We have a mission," Aria continued, her voice firm. "The Xyrexians are out there, and they've taken a colony. We need to defend it. We need to remind the galaxy that humanity isn't finished." A collective murmur of agreement rippled through the crew. They were awake, alive, and ready. The Titan was more than a ship. It was their final hope, the last weapon capable of bringing humanity back from the brink. "Get to your stations," Aria ordered. "We move out in 5 minutes." As the crew scattered to prepare, Aria stood alone for a moment. She stared out at the view of space beyond, knowing that once they left the Titan's hidden sanctum, there would be no turning back. The Xyrexians had no idea what was coming for them, and she was determined to show them. The U.S. Titan cut through space, its massive engines propelling it forward, leaving behind the lifeless void of the forgotten system. Captain Aria Carter stood at the helm, her eyes scanning the star map before her, the distress signal still faintly echoing in the background. She had given the order to proceed to the planet, and the crew had prepared as best as they could, but the uncertainty of what lay ahead made every passing moment feel like an eternity. The crew had barely finished assembling at their stations, and already a sense of urgency hung in the air. Arya had seen the shock on their faces when they first learned that humanity had fallen, and the galaxy had forgotten them. But there was no time to dwell on that now. The Hyrexians were out there, and she had a ship that could still be a force to reckon with. That was all that mattered. "Captain, the planet's atmosphere is in range," Lieutenant Kane called out from the navigation console. "The distress signal's origin is from a colony near the equator. It's small, isolated. We're not picking up any other ships in the vicinity." Arya's lips tightened. A small, isolated colony. That meant the Hyrexians were either hunting or worse, preparing to finish off what remained of humanity's scattered outposts. She knew the chances of survival for the colony were slim, but she couldn't just ignore their plea for help. It was humanity's duty to stand and fight, even if they were the last ones standing. "Are we receiving any more information from the colony?" Arya asked. Kane shook his head. "No, Captain. The signal's too fragmented, and the Hyrexian fleet must be jamming the area. I can't get a clean read on anything." Arya stood still for a moment, her mind racing. The Titan had been built to survive war, but it wasn't invincible. The Hyrexians had superior numbers and technology. The Titan was humanity's last chance, but that didn't mean they could just march in and expect victory. They had to play their cards carefully. "Prepare the weapons," Arya said, her voice cold. "This isn't going to be an easy fight. We need to be ready for anything." As the crew scrambled to their stations, Arya moved to the tactical display, her mind sharpening as she considered the next steps. It was only a matter of time before the Hyrexians realized the Titan had returned, and when they did, they wouldn't hold back. But what Arya had seen in the crew's eyes earlier, an undying spark, a refusal to let humanity be wiped out, gave her hope. They had a chance. Suddenly, the ship's sensors blared an alarm, cutting through the tense silence of the bridge. Arya whirled around, her instincts kicking in. A new signal had just appeared on the radar, an enormous fleet, traveling fast. "The Hyrexians," Kane muttered, reading the sensor readouts. "They're already here." Arya's heart sank. They were too close. The Hyrexians had likely tracked the Titan from the moment it activated. Now, with the Titan and the colony both in their sights, a brutal battle loomed on the horizon. "Take us in closer to the planet's surface," Arya ordered, her voice steady, betraying none of the fear she felt. "We need to make sure we're out of their direct line of sight until we can plan an assault." Kane complied, pushing the controls forward as the Titan angled downward. The ship's massive size made it a perfect target, but if they got close enough to the planet's atmosphere, they could use its terrain for cover. The goal was to strike first, hit fast, and give the Hyrexians no time to regroup. "Captain, we're approaching the planetary defense zone," Lieutenant Chen, the chief engineer, reported from the lower decks. "The colony's shields are down. They've been sabotaged." "Damn it," Arya muttered under her breath. The colony had no defense against the Hyrexians. Whatever happened next, the humans aboard the Titan would be their only hope. "How much time do we have?" she asked, glancing over her shoulder. "Not much," Kane replied. "The Hyrexian fleet is closing in fast. They'll be in range to fire in less than 10 minutes. Arya nodded, her expression hardening. She had never been one for half measures, and today would be no different. "Prepare to fire at will once we enter firing range. We strike before they even know we're here." The crew began readying the weapons, each person moving with a purpose. The Titan was an unrelenting war machine, and they would make sure the Hyrexians knew just how powerful humanity could be, even in its darkest hour. But as the ship descended closer to the surface, Arya couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of a much larger conflict. The Cyrexians had underestimated humanity before. This time, they wouldn't get the chance again. With a single resolute glance at the horizon, Ariad gave the order. Prepare for battle. Let's remind the galaxy what humans are capable of. The Titan descended through the atmosphere, its massive engines roaring as it cut through the thick clouds of the planet below. The crew moved with practiced precision, the bridge alive with activity as each member prepared for the battle ahead. Aria stood tall, her hands gripping the armrests of her command chair, her eyes fixed on the tactical display. The Cyrexian fleet was closing in fast, too fast. But the Titan had something they didn't: speed and unpredictability. "Captain, we're in position," Lieutenant Kane called from the navigation console, his voice calm but with an edge of urgency. Cyrexian fleet on intercept course, weapons primed. They'll be in range in less than 3 minutes. Aria nodded, her mind calculating the odds. The Titan was outnumbered, but its design was meant to excel in situations like this. The Cyrexians might have superior firepower, but the Titan had been built to be unpredictable, its immense size belying its agility. "Engage evasive maneuvers," she ordered. "Take us to their flank. We'll hit them where they least expect it." The ship lurched slightly as Kane yanked the controls, sending the Titan into a sharp turn. The ship's massive engines flared as they adjusted power, the ship twisting like a snake through the clouds. The Cyrexians were not prepared for such sudden movements, their formations designed to overpower larger, slower targets. As the Titan veered toward the flank of the enemy fleet, their firepower rained down, but none of it hit its mark. "Ha! They're too slow," Lieutenant Chen laughed grimly from her post. "We're moving faster than they can target us." Aria couldn't help but feel a surge of pride. The Titan was built to withstand the harshest of battles, and it was proving its worth. The ship was a beast, but it moved like a predator, too fast for its enemies to lock onto, too unpredictable for them to counter. "Prepare the forward cannons," Aria said. "Target their weakest ships first. Let's break their formation." The Titan's massive turrets swiveled into position, and in an instant, the ship's forward cannons unleashed a barrage of energy blasts that tore through the enemy ranks. The first Cyrexian ship, a smaller destroyer, exploded in a brilliant flash of light. Aria's heart pounded as the Titan surged forward, making another sharp turn to avoid incoming fire. "They're starting to regroup," Kane said, his fingers flying over the controls. "They're adapting to our movements. They won't be caught off guard much longer." Aria's lips tightened. The Cyrexians were quick learners, and it wouldn't be long before they countered the Titan's agile tactics. She had to act fast, strike them while they were still disorganized. "Activate the rear turrets," she ordered. "Give them a reason to hesitate." The Titan unleashed a series of rapid, focused blasts from its rear weapons, forcing the Cyrexian fleet to scatter and avoid the incoming fire. But as the Cyrexian ships spread out, one of the larger vessels began targeting the Titan directly, its heavy artillery locking onto the ship's rear. The energy beams from the Cyrexian battleship hit the Titan's shields with a deafening crack. The ship shuddered, but the shields held. "We've got a big one on our tail, Captain," Kane shouted. "It's locking on with heavy firepower." Aria's eyes narrowed as she saw the looming threat on the tactical screen. The Cyrexian battleship was massive. Its firepower alone could easily cripple the Titan if they didn't act quickly. But that was the Cyrexian mistake. They had underestimated the Titan's ability to move swiftly despite its size. "Full power to the forward thrusters," Aria commanded. "We're going to hit them with everything we've got. Go straight at them, and then drop below their firing line." The Titan surged forward, the immense ship's engines roaring with power. The Cyrexian battleship fired another round of blasts, but the Titan had already dropped beneath its line of fire, moving at incredible speed for such a massive vessel. The Cyrexian ship's cannon fire sailed harmlessly above the Titan's hull. In one smooth, calculated motion, The Titan spun upward, its front cannons aiming directly at the underside of the Cyrexian battleship. Before the Cyrexian vessel could adjust, the Titan fired, sending a wave of energy blasts crashing into its exposed flank. The massive ship trembled as the energy beams tore through its shields, and then, with a violent explosion, the Cyrexian battleship erupted in a blinding flash of light. A cheer erupted from the crew, but Aria remained focused. This was just the beginning. The Cyrexians had learned quickly, and they were regrouping. The Titan was fast, but the Cyrexians had the numbers. The battle wasn't won yet. "Captain," Kane said urgently, "we've got incoming reinforcements. More Cyrexian ships are arriving." Aria took a deep breath. She could feel the weight of the moment settling over her. The Titan had shown its power, but it was far from over. They had to keep pushing, keep striking fast and hard. They were outnumbered, but they still had something the Cyrexians didn't: humanity's will to survive. "We hold our ground," Aria said, her voice steely. "The Titan may be the last of us, but we're going to remind the galaxy who we are. Prepare for the next wave." The battle raged above the planet's surface, a chaotic dance of explosions and blinding light as the Titan darted and weaved between the Cyrexian ships. Despite their overwhelming numbers, the Cyrexians were struggling to maintain their advantage against the ferocious tactics of the last human battleship. Captain Aria Carter stood at the helm, her focus razor-sharp. Her eyes were fixed on the tactical display, watching the movements of the Cyrexian fleet as they regrouped. They had suffered heavy losses, but their reinforcements were beginning to arrive in waves. The Titan's weapons had taken down several ships, but the enemy was adapting quickly. "Captain, their flagship is deploying more ships," Lieutenant Kane reported, his voice tight with urgency. "It looks like they're preparing for a full-scale assault." Aria's mind raced. The Titan had dealt a significant blow, but it wouldn't be long before the Cyrexians turned the tide. She had to act quickly. Humanity couldn't afford to lose this battle. Not when they had this one opportunity to show the galaxy that they could still fight. "Take us in close to the planet's surface," Aria commanded. "We need to draw their attention and make them think we're retreating. The last thing we want is for them to get complacent." The ship's engines roared to life as Kane obeyed, sending the Titan plummeting towards the planet's surface. Aria could feel the gravitational pull tugging at the ship's massive frame, but she kept her mind clear. The Cyrexians were arrogant. They thought they could easily wipe out humanity once and for all. They had underestimated the Titan and its crew. Now, it was time to make them pay for that mistake. As the Titan hurtled through the atmosphere, Aria's voice rang out over the comms. "Prepare for a sneak attack. We hit them from below. Their sensors won't pick us up in the lower layers of the atmosphere." The crew worked quickly, preparing the weapons and making final adjustments to the ship's trajectory. They had become a well-oiled machine, every person on board understanding the gravity of the situation. This wasn't just about surviving. This was about reclaiming humanity's pride, about showing the galaxy that Earth's legacy wasn't gone, that humanity's fight had only just begun. Suddenly, alarms blared throughout the ship. Aria's heart skipped a beat as the tactical display lit up with dozens of new targets closing in. The Cyrexian flagship, a massive dreadnought, was now at the forefront of the enemy's formation. It had deployed more fighters, and they were closing fast. "Brace for impact," Aria shouted. The Titan shuddered as enemy fire struck its shields, rattling the entire ship. The blast shields held, but the Titan lurched violently, sending a wave of dizziness through the crew. "Shields holding, Captain," Lieutenant Chen called out from the engineering station. "But we've taken some heavy damage. The main reactor's stabilizing, but we'll need repairs once this is over." Aria nodded sharply, her mind racing. She had expected this. The Titan was built to take damage, but even the most durable ships had limits. As long as they could keep the enemy at bay, they would have time to fix the ship and keep fighting. "Keep the shields up," she ordered. "Full power to forward weapons. We can't let that dreadnought get any closer." The Titan surged forward once more, narrowly avoiding incoming fire as its cannons opened up with a series of focused blasts aimed at the approaching Cyrexian fighters. The first wave of attackers was obliterated in a series of brilliant explosions, but more were coming, pouring out of the massive flagship like a swarm of angry hornets. "Captain, their dreadnought is targeting us with heavy artillery," Kane warned. "We've got less than a minute before their main guns come online." "Redirect all power to the rear shields," Area commanded, "and initiate evasive maneuvers. Let's make them waste their shots." The Titan banked sharply to the left, diving back into the atmosphere. The massive ship was designed for agility, and its large frame, though intimidating, allowed it to outmaneuver most conventional warships. The Cyrexians fired once again, but their shots missed by a wide margin, flying harmlessly into the void. Area's eyes were glued to the display, tracking the Cyrexian flagship as it closed in. Their firepower was overwhelming, but there was a weakness, just like every other ship. The Titan just needed the right angle. "Fire," she ordered. The Titan's cannons unleashed another wave of devastating energy, striking the underside of the dreadnought. The impact was immense, and for a moment, the ship seemed to tremble under the force of the blast. The Cyrexian flagship faltered, its shields flickering as the Titan fired again, sending the flagship into a tailspin. "We've breached their shields," Lieutenant Chen shouted in disbelief. Area's heart raced as the Cyrexian flagship began to break apart. The Titan had done it. They had finally gained the upper hand. The crew erupted into a cheer, but Area remained calm. The battle was far from over. "Stay focused," she commanded, her voice steady. "We've got one victory, but the war is still ahead of us. Continue the attack. Make sure they never forget what humanity is capable of." As the Titan continued to unleash hell upon the remaining Cyrexian fleet, Area knew this was just the beginning. The battle for humanity's survival wasn't over yet, but for the first time in centuries, the galaxy would know that Earth was still alive. And it wasn't going down without a fight. The Titan continued its relentless assault on the remaining Cyrexian fleet, its massive guns firing with surgical precision. The flagship was in full retreat, its once imposing form now damaged and vulnerable. However, as Area watched the unfolding battle, she could feel the weight of the next phase of the conflict closing in on them. Their victory was hard-won, but it was only one battle in a war that humanity couldn't afford to lose. The Cyrexians were regrouping, pulling back to form a defensive perimeter. Their fighters, once scattered and disorganized, were now returning to protect their injured flagship, and their warships began to move with greater coordination. It was clear that they weren't giving up easily. "We've damaged their flagship, but they're not retreating," Lieutenant Kane reported, his voice filled with concern. "Their remaining ships are forming up in a defensive grid. It's like they're preparing for something bigger." Area gritted her teeth, her gaze never leaving the tactical screen. The Cyrexians were not just trying to regroup. They were preparing for a final, decisive strike. The sheer size and power of their remaining fleet suggested they were preparing a concentrated offensive to overwhelm the Titan in one swift blow. "Can we avoid them?" Area asked, trying to come up with a solution. Kane shook his head. "Not without risking getting caught in their crossfire. They've got us pinned in a corner. We're too close to the planet now, and they'll be able to track our every movement." Area considered the options before her, her mind racing. This was exactly what the Cyrexians wanted, to corner them and unleash everything they had. There was no way to escape the enemy's firepower unless they turned the tables. The Titan could still make a move, but it had to be a risky one. "Helm, I want full power to the rear thrusters," Area ordered. "Get us as far from this defensive grid as possible, but make sure we don't break formation completely. We need to make them think we're retreating. Lure them in." Her orders were met with immediate action. The Titan's engines hummed as the ship began to move backward, pulling away from the Cyrexian fleet. At first, the enemy seemed to fall for it, locking their weapons onto the Titan, thinking they were escaping. Area felt a surge of hope. If they could draw the Tyrexians away from their defensive formation, they might be able to find an opening. However, just as Area thought they might pull it off, an alert blared across the bridge. "Captain, incoming fire," Lieutenant Chen shouted. "Tyrexian battleships are adjusting their trajectory. They figured out our plan." Area cursed under her breath. The Tyrexians were too intelligent. They'd caught on to their ruse. "We're going to need to fight our way out of this," Area said, her voice steely. The Titan was retreating, but not for long. The enemy ships were closing in fast. Area knew she didn't have the luxury of time to regroup. The only option now was to take the fight to them. "Reverse course," she barked. "Full speed ahead, and get us within range of the lead battleship. All weapons, fire at will." The crew scrambled to execute her command. The Titan swiveled quickly, its weapons primed and ready. The Tyrexians were moving in too tightly, their ships closing the gap in a formation that left them vulnerable if attacked at the right angle. The Titan was at its most dangerous when it was on the offensive, its weapons a fearsome testament to human ingenuity. As the ship sped toward the Tyrexian lines, Area's heart pounded. She had no doubt that the Titan could take them on. It had already proven its might. But the Tyrexians had the numbers, and that was a disadvantage no human ship could completely overcome. "On my mark," Area said, her voice like steel. "Fire." The Titan unleashed a devastating barrage. The forward cannons blazed to life, tearing through the Tyrexian ships with brutal precision. The first battleship exploded in a flurry of sparks and debris, its shields faltering under the sheer force of the Titan's weapons. But the rest of the Tyrexian fleet retaliated instantly, sending a barrage of fire back toward the Titan. "Shields holding at 60%, Lieutenant Chen reported. "We can take a few more hits, but we need to make it count." The crew fought with the fury of those who knew what was at stake, humanity's very survival. Every shot from the Titan made its mark, ripping through the Tyrexian vessels. Yet with every victory, the enemy continued to adapt, adjusting their strategy to counter the Titan's deadly strikes. "Keep pushing," Area shouted. "We can break them. We just need to stay on the offensive." The Titan moved like a predator through the chaos, its massive hull dodging incoming fire, and "We need to stop that weapon from firing," Area muttered to herself. She turned to her crew. "This isn't just about us anymore. It's about the survival of everything we've ever known. We're going to take that flagship down, no matter what it takes." Kane turned to her, his eyes filled with determination. "How do we do that, Captain? We don't have the firepower to go head-to-head with that ship." Area's mind raced. They were facing an overwhelming enemy, but she knew the Titan was humanity's last hope. The Titan's strength lay in its speed, its unpredictability, and its ability to strike fast and hard. The only way they could win this fight was to make the Tyrexians believe they were dealing with something far more dangerous than they had anticipated. "We won't take them head-on," Area said, her voice sharp. "We're going to outmaneuver them. Get us within striking distance of their weapons core. We need to disable it before they can fire." The crew nodded, their faces grim but resolute. Everyone knew the risks involved, but they had come this far. They couldn't turn back now. "Helm, take us in," Area ordered, her voice filled with resolve. "We're going in at full speed. Prepare for evasive maneuvers on my mark." The Titan surged forward, its massive engines roaring as it tore through the vacuum of space. The Tyrexian flagship loomed closer, its weapons charging, ready to unleash hell. Area's fingers clenched into fists as the ship accelerated, her mind calculating every angle, every possible strike. They had to make this count. The flagship's weapons began to power up, bright arcs of energy crackling along the hull. The Titan was still too far away for a direct assault, but the Tyrexians were beginning to react. Slowly, but surely. Area knew the moment they realized they couldn't hit the Titan directly. they would change tactics. The time to strike was closing in. "Now," Arya shouted. The Titan swerved violently to the left, barely avoiding a barrage of incoming fire from the flagship's forward cannons. The ship shuddered as the blasts missed by mere meters, but the Titan didn't slow down. With an almost unnatural grace for such a massive vessel, it darted through the field of fire, positioning itself for the next phase of the plan. "Bring us to their underside," Arya ordered, her voice cold and steady. "They won't expect an attack from this angle." Kane worked furiously, his hands flying across the controls. The Titan dropped beneath the flagship, a move that took the directions by surprise. The sensors on the flagship's main weapons couldn't track the Titan's position in time. It was a perfect opportunity. "Captain, we're in position," Kane confirmed. "We can't get any closer without risking detection, but we're within firing range." "Fire everything we've got," Arya commanded, her heart pounding in her chest. "All weapons, now." The Titan unleashed its full arsenal in one devastating volley. The energy blasts rained down on the Cyrexian flagship's underbelly, targeting the critical systems that powered its planet-killer weapon. The Titan's turrets fired relentlessly, hammering the flagship's shields, causing them to falter and crack under the pressure. Arya's breath caught as the flagship's massive weapons trembled, the first signs of instability appearing. The flagship's main gun, still not fully charged, began to flicker, its systems struggling to stay online. "Captain, we've got them," Chen shouted. "Their main weapon is failing. We've disabled it." A wave of relief washed over Arya, but she knew it wasn't over yet. The flagship was still alive, and there were far more Hyrexian ships surrounding them. But for the first time since the battle began, humanity had seized a glimmer of hope. "Prepare for a final push," Arya said, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. "This fight isn't over, but we've made our mark. Now let's finish this." The Cyrexian flagship was staggering. Its once impenetrable shields were failing, and the massive planet-killer weapon was now nothing more than a smoldering wreck. But the Titan wasn't out of the woods yet. The Cyrexians were regrouping, their remaining warships tightening their formation, preparing for a final desperate assault. Arya's eyes scanned the battlefield. The Titan had delivered a powerful blow, but it had also taken heavy damage. The outer hull had been compromised in several areas, and the main reactor was showing signs of strain. Still, the ship was holding together, and as long as it did, they would keep fighting. "Captain, the flagship is down to 30% power," Lieutenant Chen reported, her voice a mix of relief and concern. "But they're not retreating. Their remaining ships are charging up for a final strike." Arya nodded, her face a mask of determination. "I don't think they're done yet. They'll come at us with everything they've got. We need to take out their remaining forces before they have the chance to launch another attack." Kane glanced at her, eyes filled with resolve. "We've only got one shot at this. If we push too hard, we could break apart. But if we don't act now, they'll overwhelm us." Arya took a deep breath, her mind racing. The Titan had already defied all odds by holding its ground this long. Humanity had shown the galaxy that it would never go down quietly, but the fight wasn't just for survival anymore. It was for the future of humanity, for the generations to come. "We're going to give them everything we've got," Arya said firmly. "Helm, take us in. Full speed ahead. We make them regret underestimating us." The Titan surged forward, engines at full power. The remaining Cyrexian fleet turned to face them, their ships bristling with weapons. Arya could feel the tension in the air as the two forces collided once more. The Titan's massive guns fired, slamming into the lead Cyrexian ship with incredible force, sending it spiraling into oblivion. But the enemy retaliated, their firepower cutting through the Titan's shields. "Shields holding at 40%, Lieutenant Chen called out. "We're taking heavy hits, Captain. We can't sustain this much longer." Arya's eyes narrowed. The Cyrexians were throwing everything they had left of them. It was now or never. If they didn't finish this quickly, the Titan would be overwhelmed. Redirect all power to the forward shields. Arya ordered, her voice calm despite the chaos. We need to push through their line. The moment we're through, target their reactor cores. The crew worked swiftly to adjust the ship's systems. The Titan adjusted course, charging through the field of enemy warships with terrifying speed. The Xyrexians fired relentlessly, their weapons blazing across the Titan's path, but the ship's hull held strong as it barreled forward. Then, with a blinding flash, the Titan slammed into the heart of the enemy formation. The lead Cyrexian warship exploded into a burst of fire and debris as the Titan's cannons tore through its defenses. But it wasn't enough. The Xyrexians were closing in, and the Titan couldn't keep up this pace for long. Arya's heart raced as she watched the tactical display. A fleet of 5 remaining Cyrexian ships was closing in fast, their weapons charging up to deliver the final blow. She had moments, maybe seconds, before the Titan would be torn apart. We need to end this now, Arya shouted. Focus all fire on the central command ship. We take that down, the rest of them will scatter. Chen's fingers flew across the controls as the Titan fired once again. This time, the blast was pinpointed. It hit the Cyrexian flagship directly in the heart of its command bridge. For a moment, everything went silent. Then came the explosion. The shockwave rippled across the battlefield, sending the remaining enemy ships into disarray. Their lines broke as the flagship was engulfed in a violent explosion, taking down several other warships in the process. The Titan's relentless assault had paid off. Direct hit on the command center. The flagship is down. Lieutenant Kane exclaimed, his voice filled with disbelief. Arya exhaled sharply, but there was no time for celebration. The remaining Cyrexian ships were now in full retreat, their command structure shattered. They were broken, vulnerable. Prepare to engage the remaining ships, Arya ordered, her voice unwavering. We've won, but we can't let them regroup. The Titan gave chase, its guns firing rapidly, chasing down the few remaining Cyrexian vessels. One by one, they were destroyed, their shields failing as the Titan systematically picked them off. There was no escape, no surrender. The fight was ending in one final act of defiance. Moments later, the last of the Cyrexian ships exploded in a fiery burst, leaving only debris scattered across the void. The Titan hovered in the silence of space. The battlefield was still. Arya stood at the command center, her breath slow and deliberate as the crew members around her began to cheer, though it was muted by the exhaustion and wounds they had sustained. The Titan had won. The last human battleship had done what no one thought possible. We did it, Lieutenant Kane said, his voice filled with awe. Arya nodded, her eyes fixed on the stars outside. Humanity had survived. The war wasn't over, but today they had reclaimed their place in the universe. They had shown the galaxy what they were capable of. Take us home, Arya said quietly, the weight of victory settling into her bones. It's time to rebuild. As the Titan turned toward Earth, the remnants of the Cyrexian fleet drifting behind them, Arya knew this was just the beginning. The future of humanity was uncertain, but with the Titan still flying, they had proven something far more important. Humanity would never be forgotten.